From futuristic straddling buses to missiles under the ice, here are 10 sneak peeks at some of history's craziest abandoned secret technologies. Boeing YAL-1. Imagine a plane that looked like a normal airliner, but with a deadly twist. That was the thinking behind Boeing's YAL-1, which was developed in the early 21st century. Taking the body of a 747-400F, the US military decided to arm it with a coil, or chemical oxygen iodine laser. Equipped with a big nose through which the laser would be aimed, the YAL-1 was intended to intercept enemy missiles. After an initial flight in 2002, a test involving what's described as a low-power laser was conducted in 2007. 2010 saw a more powerful blast deployed, which took down a couple of projectiles. So far, so good. However, the project was cancelled in 2011 and the plane itself scrapped in 2014. Former Secretary of Defense Robert Michael Gates believed the idea wasn't viable due to the overall range of the coil, plus the billions of dollars needed to keep a group of YAL-1s in the air. They hoped to have a devastating weapon that could shoot down missiles. Sadly for Boeing, that dream got mothballed. Instead, it was the YAL-1 that got shot down, or at least that's what they want us to believe. China's Transit Elevated Bus. In 2016, news emerged of a Chinese bus that looked like something out of Star Trek. Its mission was to boldly go to the country's congested road network, providing a practical solution owing to its shape and height. What does that mean? Well, the TEB, Transit Elevated Bus, is shaped like a movable tunnel for cars. Not only does it transport passengers from A to B, it does so while off the tarmac, which is where the straddling comes in. Traffic simply drives beneath the bus so it doesn't hold things up. Pretty neat, huh? Well, not quite. It seemed promising and generated more buzz than a swarm of bees landing on a chainsaw. The sneak peeks at this wonder bus went viral, but sadly, the tantalizing glimpse of the future did not become a reality. Aside from alleged financial irregularities, where multiple people were charged with fraud and embezzlement, a big engineering problem emerged. TEB couldn't handle corners too well. Plus, while it was turning corners, it still managed to block traffic who weren't going to play stuntman and drive under a sideways bus. The project was scrapped, with congestion surviving to fight another day. Seems like the future of elevated transportation is still on wings or on rails. Hiller VZ-1 Pawnee. Big things come in small packages, but is that the case when it comes to warfare? There's seemingly no shortage of tiny drones and unmanned aerial vehicles that can cause death and destruction these days, but back in the 1950s, they didn't have airborne robots like that. One thing that they did have, on the other hand, albeit briefly, was the Hiller VZ-1 Pawnee. It was a flying platform where the pilot stood upright while contra-rotating fans lifted them skywards. Now that's a $10 word right there. Contra-rotating means parts built around an axis which rotate in different directions. So if one propeller turns clockwise, the other one turns counterclockwise. Beginning in 1953, the US Army partnered with the Hiller Aircraft Company to bring designer Charles Horton Zimmerman's concept to life. How on earth do you steer this thing? The pilot would have to shift their body weight to change direction. Sounds a little weird, like a flying unicycle, but actually the Pawnee didn't do too badly. Its downfall was that it was too small and didn't go high enough for the military's top brass's liking. The VZ-1 only reached a height of around 30 feet with a less than awe-inspiring top speed of 16 miles per hour. Now, it's just a curiosity, a drone with a pilot from a simpler time. Would you ever think about going up in one of these? It looks too dangerous for me personally. Be sure to let me know down in the comments section below, and don't forget to subscribe. NASA Helios. A solar-powered air glider? Sounds crazy, no? As it turns out, NASA took a detour and began channeling their efforts into air travel during the late 1990s and early 2000s. Of course, they had plenty of experience in designing rockets for ultra-fast travel through the air, but that was so they could get beyond our sky and into outer space. The unmanned Helios project was more modest by comparison, but no less ambitious in scope. With a 247-foot, 75-meter wingspan, it resembled a futuristic take on one of the old Wright brothers' planes. What did NASA want to do with it? The clue is in the name, Helios, coming from the legendary sun god. This cutting-edge mode of transportation was powered by solar energy using an experimental fuel cell system, and the agency wanted it to fly as high as 100,000 feet, 30.5 kilometers. It never achieved this in the end, but with a record-breaking final tally of 97,000 feet, 30 kilometers, it got got very close. Unfortunately, it only ever made it 4 years before disaster struck. In 2003, NASA engineers were testing it in Hawaii when it malfunctioned and took a dive into the Pacific Ocean, 10 miles, 16 kilometers west of the island of Kauai. Anyone think it could still be down there in the depths, plotting revenge on the humans who crashed it? Well, the scientists did recover most of it, so unfortunately for science fiction fans, there's not much mystery surrounding its final flight. Tupolev Tu-144. In the world of supersonic passenger jets, the relatively unknown airplane was actually the first. But what happened to it? Many people know about the Concorde jet, which let regular folks fly across the Atlantic in only about 3 hours. It might have stolen all the attention as a supersonic passenger plane, but there were other players in the game. The most notable and first attempt at a commercial supersonic jet was the Tupolev Tu-144, the USSR's rival to the Concorde. Though it looked similar, underneath the body panels, it was designed totally differently. Even so, some news outlets and people couldn't help nicknaming it the Concordski. Tragically, the Tu-144 entered the history books for all the wrong reasons. It won respect from the aviation industry but was not practical enough to succeed. This was shockingly demonstrated via not one but 2 fatal crashes. One in 1973 where the Tu-144 broke up and hit the village of Goussonville, France. The other disaster happened after a fire led to an emergency landing in 1978. 2 flight engineers lost their lives. The Russians tried flying it as a passenger plane, but technical faults, the incredible noise generated by the Tu-144's afterburners, and the increasing price of oil meant it got grounded after just 55 scheduled passenger flights. Only 17 copies of the plane were ever made. A few flights for military purposes continued occasionally into the 1980s, including in space shuttle training for would-be cosmonauts. In the 1990s, one flew again a few times as part of a research project with NASA funding, but by 1999 the project was cancelled due to budget constraints. That was the last time, likely ever, that a Tu-144 ever touched the sky. Rockwell X-30. Elon Musk and his company SpaceX may be doing their part trying to make commercial space travel a reality, but they are just the latest in a line of companies aiming to get people journeying beyond our atmosphere regularly. Back in the 1980s, President Ronald Reagan talked about the need for fast and efficient space travel using the description "a new Orient Express." Now, aside from its status as a murder scene thanks to Agatha Christie's famous book, the Orient Express was the ultimate in luxury travel. Sadly, when it came to the Rockwell X-30, there was barely any luxury to be found. The X-30 was America's attempt to create a NASP, or National Aerospace Plane. In 1993, the project, partly run by Rockwell International, was killed off 7 years after work had started, and it doesn't take a master detective to work out the cause. This SSTO, or single stage to orbit spacecraft, was designed for 2 passengers. Whereas a normal space shuttle will burn up a ton of fuel and jettison parts, as well as rocket boosters along the way, the X-30 was intended as a single unit that would get up there, get back, and be used again for future trips. The goal was to go from Washington to Tokyo in a mere couple of hours. Take that, jet airplanes! Unfortunately, the money and the tech was not there to get the project off the ground, literally and figuratively. Project Storm Fury. Imagine defeating the most powerful winds Mother Nature throws at us, through science. Now the world has some very smart people, but sometimes they do stuff that sounds a little out there. Sometimes you've got to take risks in order to get results, but trying to take on tropical cyclones by flying planes into them sounds crazy to me, and that idea, dubbed Project Storm Fury, did not take off. The weather-weakening scheme, running between 1962 and 1983, involved US aircraft depositing silver iodide into the heart of the cyclone. Now, I was confused when I first learned this. Why throw iodide into a natural weather phenomenon? It was based on the idea that the compound might cause heat to leave the water deep inside the storm cell of the hurricane. Apparently, this would widen the eye of the storm, which would make it weaker. This would save many thousands of lives in a natural disaster, so the theory went. The process is known as cloud seeding. As it turned out, the experimenters were on the wrong track, and the silver iodide did not prove itself a useful or effective solution. Also, as we all know, storms are unpredictable. The tropical storm test cases sometimes weakened without any outside intervention, which left experts scratching their heads. Storm Fury was washed down the drain, but it did provide some interesting data for meteorologists, who took the results and used them as a basis to predict the movements of future storms, including the ones we have today. UNC. It sounds menacing and mysterious, but what is it? Truth is, it was a big deal back in the late 1980s, though it was never finished. Built by Russia's Institute for High Energy Physics, it nearly became the world's biggest particle accelerator. That's right, before the Large Hadron Collider in Switzerland, there was this massive device. Before scientists discovered evidence of the famous Higgs boson particle, which they think could be responsible for gravity, in 2012, projects like this tried to pin it down with high energy and massive magnetic fields. It runs for approximately 30 miles, 48 kilometers, under the town of Protvino, and while abandoned, it's still a popular destination for adventurers looking for a unique photo op. What you'll find down there is a huge tunnel network. Plans were afoot for UNC to have its own train system, which tells you something about the scale of this project. Despite being out of use, the site needs to be maintained regularly. Groundwater can accumulate, and the Russian authorities have to pump it out regularly, at no small cost. The end of the Soviet Union spelled disaster for any hopes of Higgs boson-based research on the Russian side. There just wasn't enough money left, and in 1996 the plug was pulled, leaving Switzerland to find the elusive particle just 16 years later. Stanley R. Mickelson Complex. Plenty of projects got mothballed in development, but this one actually opened for operation, only to be closed 24 hours later. What happened with the Stanley R. Mickelson Safeguard Complex in North Dakota? It's a true tale of missiles and mishaps. Stanley Raymond Mickelson himself was a U.S. Army Air Defense Command general who passed away in 1966. But, in his honor, the Army created a giant missile array in the middle of nowhere. Work on the complex started in the early 1970s, but right as it was in the middle of construction, in 1972, the US signed the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty with the Soviets. The United States Safeguard program was designed to launch anti-ballistic missiles in the event of an attack on their missile silos. If the USSR had launched a strike against the United States, they would have been intercepted by 30 Spartan missiles and 70 Sprint missiles, which had a shorter range. The complex went into operation in 1975. The following year, it went to full operational capacity. After just a single day, a mere 24 hours, the place was shut down. Talk about an anticlimax. Though now the complex is mostly degraded after 45 years out of service, there is an interesting follow-up happening right now. Part of the complex has been put up for auction this year. That's a little bit terrifying, to be honest. It seems like something a supervillain would like to get his hands on. Who do you think would buy a place like this, and for what purpose? Leave a comment with your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe because there's just one more unbelievable piece of secret tech out there. Project Iceworm. The scene? Northwest Greenland. The year? 1959. What happened? Well, if you believed the news reports, it was just the United States attempting to build a research center called Camp Century. It was talked about as a place where soldiers would go to learn about extreme environments and push mankind further in the process. There was a lot of publicity for the new center, which was like a city under the ice. It was so wholesome that even a pair of Boy Scouts were sent to Greenland for a tour and an internship. Just one little problem, Camp Century was a distraction. What the military really had in mind was a 52,000 square mile nuclear missile storage area named Project Iceworm. Tunnels were being created beneath the ice cap to house 2,100 silos and 600 nuclear weapons, which would be moved around between the different silos using rail cars. Why all the movement? To keep the Soviet Union guessing as to their location. The Cold War was starting in earnest, and Project Iceworm was set to make it a whole lot colder. Ultimately, however, the dream melted. Snow and ice had a nasty habit of moving around, so the place was not stable. The reactor that powered Camp Century didn't work right. Plus, never mind the Russians, the American team were busy arguing amongst themselves over what to do. The truth came out in 1997 thanks to the Danish government. Why the Danes? Because they were aware of the secret project since Greenland is a territory of Denmark. They declassified all the information about the secret plan 30 years after Project Iceworm was shut down. While the facility was closed down forever, it may be making a weird, unwelcome comeback. Global warming will apparently lead to the melting of the snow in the surrounding area, which could exhume all the radioactive waste left behind from its frozen tomb. Imagine tons of radiation from the 1960s being released back into the natural world. It's the kind of thing that keeps you up at night for sure. From gravity-defying waterfalls to magnetic hills, here are 10 places where gravity doesn't seem to exist. Hoover Dam, Nevada, USA. Rivers flow downhill, water drops to the ground when you pour it from the top of a building. Everything obeys the law of gravity. That's what you were taught, right? But is that always the case? There's a dam that might be violating the law of gravity. The Hoover Dam is majestically situated in the Black Canyon of the Colorado River, right on the border between Nevada and Arizona, USA. Built in the 1930s to supply electricity to California, this dam is known for several mind-blowing facts. Its magnificent height of 726 feet, 221.3 meters, made it the world's tallest dam when it was built. Its power plant was the world's largest hydroelectric station from 1939 to 1949, and the second highest bridge in America runs along the top of the dam. Although Hoover has been relegated to seconds as it's become the second tallest dam in the US, it's a great tourist attraction due to its shocking, gravity-defying feature. Tourists that visit the Hoover Dam and pour water or soda over the edge of its over 700-foot, 213-meter barrier notice that water flows upwards instead of downwards. Amazing, right? This occurrence leaves us with lots of questions. Does Hoover defy gravity? If the dam has an anti-gravity field, why doesn't it send other items flying upwards? One fascinating thing is that there's gravity along the perimeter of the Black Canyon. So, what causes the upward flow of water when poured from that height? Scientists believe that the probable cause is heavy wind around the dam. The height and shape of the structure cause an updraft, which is too strong for water to fall downward. This explanation is quite logical if we must admit. Well, if you ever plan on visiting this historical dam, be sure to experiment with some liquid. Just be careful not to litter. Mystery Spot, Santa Cruz, California. Just like its name implies, the mystery spot hides an inexplicable mystery. This unusual house is situated on a 150-foot circular area in the forest outside Santa Cruz. In 1939, a group of surveyors discovered the spot by noticing that its magnetic field had irregularities. George Prather opened the area to the public in 1940. The mystery spot has become a popular tourist site in the USA. If you visit the building, you'd walk on it in a tilted manner, stand at a seemingly impossible angle, and see objects that look like they're rolling uphill. Nevertheless, some people say the house was built at an angle, and what you see at Mystery Spot is an optical illusion. But whichever narrative about this building is true, one paramount thing still holds. It makes gravity seem non-existent. Reverse Waterfall, Faroe Island, Kingdom of Denmark. Just when we thought that nothing could beat the Hoover Dam, there's another interesting discovery that will make you think twice about gravity. You might think that liquid flowing upward from a bottle is awesome. How about a waterfall? In between Scotland and Iceland, there's a waterfall that flows upwards. The waterfall shoots up, a magnificent sight to behold. You can find this strange phenomenon in the Atlantic Ocean at Faroe Island, but just like the Hoover Dam, the wind powers the water to flow upwards. Any water that flows downward is caught by the wind and pushed back up. Do you want to visit the reverse waterfall? Take a trip to Faroe Island and you can enjoy the sight. Maybe when we can travel again, if ever. Hudson Bay Area, Canada. You might think that an area of 150 feet without gravity is spectacular. How about an area that's more than 1 million kilometers? In the 1960s, scientists discovered that the Hudson Bay Area in Canada has less gravity than the rest of the world. You won't float here or have water flowing upwards, but you definitely weigh less. The fascinating thing is that it took scientists 40 years to figure out why there's less gravity in the area. It turns out that you can trace that reason back to what you studied in physics. Gravity occurs as a result of mass. Any part of the Earth with more density will have more gravity, and any part with less density will have reduced gravity. Do you remember the movie Ice Age and how the Earth was covered in ice? 10,000 years ago, during the Ice Age, Canada's experience was a bit different. A huge glacier called the Laurentide ice sheet covered the country, but that wasn't enough. The heavy ice sheet used the opportunity to squeeze the Earth's rocks and hold it down. When Laurentide finally melted, the Earth tried to bounce back. Unfortunately, it had been repressed for so long, so the planet's rock in Hudson Bay ended up not having the same mass as the rest of the world. With its reduced mass came reduced gravity. If you need instant weight loss, visit the Hudson Bay Area and you'll see the number on the scale go down. Magnetic Hill, Leh Ladakh, India. Right in Leh Kargil-Baltic National Highway of India, there's a hill that might have magnetic properties, which helps it to defy the law of gravity. The route stretches for about 30 kilometers from Leh to Kargil. You would see the road going uphill, but if you turn off your engine and put the car in neutral, the vehicle will start moving on its own. It can even move uphill at a speed of 20 kilometers per hour without a running engine. Some people believe that the hilly highway has magnetic properties that push cars uphill, while others attribute the uphill movement to supernatural elements. A few people think the road is an optical illusion. The road is actually going downhill, but the surrounding hills and areas layout makes you see it otherwise. Whatever the case may be, you can take a trip to the highway to experience this strange phenomenon. You'd also save tons of fuel in the process. St. Ignace Mystery Spot, Michigan, United States. There's yet another mystery spot in Michigan, United States. In the 1950s, some surveyors were exploring the place when their equipment stopped working in a 300-foot circular area. The area is the mystery spot. If you go into the cabin constructed there, you can balance on a wall and exchange height with another person. You can also stand in a tilted fashion without falling. Although people attribute these gravity-defying feats to an optical illusion, they're still fun and amazing to behold. Mysterious Place, Gujarat, India. Tulsi Sham in the Gir Forest National Park is famous for its 3,000-year-old Krishna temple, a hot water spring with healing powers, and its anti-gravity hill. Like the Indian National Highway, if you set your car on neutral and turn off the engine at the base of the hill, it will slowly creep uphill at a speed of 20 kilometers per hour. Residents claim that the road leads to heaven, which causes vehicles to be pulled upwards. In reality, this road situated on the border of Junagadh and Amreli district is an optical illusion. Rather than going uphill, the road slopes downhill, but its structure and horizontal line tricks your brain into thinking that it's uphill. Oregon Vortex, House of Mystery, Oregon, United States. The Oregon Vortex is in Sardine Creek in Gold Hill, Oregon. Located within a 165-foot radius, it does not just defy gravity, it also bends light and alters mass. But before buildings were constructed in the area, Native Americans called the place the Forbidden Land. Horses also refused to go through the area. The Old Gray Mining Company built an outpost in the Oregon Vortex in 1904. The building slid from its foundation and stayed at an odd angle. William McCullough rediscovered the building in 1914 and convinced his friend Lister, an engineer and geologist, to research the phenomena. The Oregon Vortex and its House of Mystery were opened to tourists in 1930, and it's the earliest recorded gravitational spot in the United States. After Lister died in 1959, his wife sold the place to Ernie and Irene Cooper. Their daughter and grandson have been managing the place ever since. If you visit the Oregon Vortex, you'll see objects rolling uphill. You can also exchange height with someone else. You could appear taller or shorter than the person depending on where you stand. If you walk around, you may need to hold the walls as you feel like you're losing your balance. There's also a broom that stands upright no matter where you place it. A professor from the University of Oregon visited the area in 1966 and claimed that the occurrences were as a result of optical illusions. In 1999, two UC Berkeley researchers added that visitors experience a different reality in Oregon Vortex because the brain's visual processing uses spatial frames of reference to create what they see. However, tourists think differently. They've used several instruments to measure the angle and tilt, and they say there's no trickery involved. Spook Hill, Lake Wales, Florida. Just like in other places, cars put on neutral appear to roll back up the hill. All you have to do is put your car on the white line indicated by a signboard and take it out of gear. Spook Hill is located in Lake Wales Ridge, Florida. About 3 million years ago, the Sand and Milestone Hills in the area were islands. According to legend, an Indian village that lived there was constantly attacked by an alligator. Their warrior chief killed the gator in a huge battle that created Lake Wales. Years later, male riders noticed that their horses were laboring on what appeared to be downhill. They named the place Spook Hill. When the road was paved, cars still moved uphill even when the ignition was off. Many people claim that this hill located on 5th Street is only an optical illusion. The changes in elevation make it look like you're at the hill's bottom when you're actually at the top. Golden Boulder, Myanmar, Asia. A large rock hanging precariously from a cliff with half of it threatening to fall off should not exist. However, the enormous granite boulder, Kyaiktayo Pagoda, has been perched at the top of a cliff in Mon State, Myanmar for 2,500 years. With a 25-foot height and a 50-foot circumference, this boulder is hard to miss. According to legend, Buddha gave a strand of his hair to a hermit. The hermit gave the hair to a king who wished that the hair be enshrined in a boulder. The king went on to pull the rock from the ocean using magic. He then found the perfect place for the golden boulder and built a pagoda where the hair was enshrined. Tourists and pilgrims visit the pagoda regularly. Some light candles, chant mantras, and give offerings to Buddha. A few place their head on the rock praying. People believe that if you complete the pilgrimage to the pagoda 3 times in a year, you'd have great fortune and tremendous wealth. Now, the site is the 3rd most important Buddhist pilgrimage site in Myanmar, also known as Burma. The pagoda gets the most pilgrims on the full moon day of Tabong in March when 90,000 candles are lit and the golden rock glitters from the sky. So, which of these seemingly gravity-defying areas do you prefer? Would you rather visit the Hoover Dam, take a pilgrimage to the Golden Boulder, or lose weight in the Hudson Bay area? Maybe you're inclined to visit one of the mystery spots or the gravitational hills. Whichever you choose, you're sure to have fun and marvel at the sight. From giant hairy spiders that could eat a small bird to strange mutant flying scorpions, here are the 10 weirdest insects in the world. Giant water bug. The giant water bug is one of the biggest insects that I'd never want to meet. The North American species can grow to be 2.5 inches, 6 centimeters long, which might not be much to you, but it's certainly big in the insect world. South American giant water bugs can grow to be 4 inches, 10 centimeters long, and that is even more impressive. These weird bugs can be found lurking below the surface of lakes and ponds where they have a tendency to nibble on the toes of unsuspecting swimmers. This is why another name for giant water bugs is toe biters. They cannot get enough of human feet. Giant water bugs can fly, despite their long and weird bodies, which are not aerodynamic at all. But what's even weirder is that they carry their eggs on their backs. What happens is the female will deposit her eggs on the back of her mate. The male giant water bug will then carry the eggs for about 2 weeks until they hatch. During this time, he ferociously protects them from predators, brings them to the surfaces so that they can get oxygen, and he moves water around his body in such a way to keep the eggs oxygenated and hydrated. Now that's a great devoted father right there. Water bugs will also play dead when they are threatened. It's a behavior known as thanatosis. If you were to ever pick up a giant water bug, it will probably look dead. But don't be fooled, it's just waiting to wake up and bite you, preferably somewhere on your feet. Just be careful around these big insects, especially in unfamiliar bodies of fresh water. Will you be looking twice next time you go barefoot in a lake or a swamp? I know I will. Let me know if you've ever had an unpleasant aquatic bug encounter in the comments below. Titan beetle. Meet the world's biggest beetle, with a name to match. This is the Titan beetle, and it can grow to be almost 7 inches, 18 centimeters long. That's big enough to stretch from the tip of your middle finger to the bottom of your palm, unless you are also a giant and have particularly large hands. Titan beetles live in the tropical rainforests of South America, specifically in Colombia, Peru, Brazil, the Guianas, and Ecuador. And while they are extremely large, they aren't actually aggressive. They do have jaws that are strong enough to break a pencil or cut your flesh, but they won't typically attack you first. You just need to be careful of their pinchers when you pick them up. Like most beetles, the Titan beetle males will fly around in the humid season looking for mates, following around pheromones in search of romance and to reproduce. It's their version of cuffing season. But one of the weirdest things about Titan beetles is that once they are grown, they may actually stop eating. These giant bugs may only eat as larvae, eating decaying wood beneath the ground. Because they only spend a few weeks as adults and scientists don't know much about the insect's biology, some scientists suggest they simply don't eat at all while in their adult forms. They get all their calories when they are larvae, then just survive off of their surplus stores of energy as adults, trying only to reproduce. This happens until they run out of energy and eventually die. There are all types of animals out there, and some of them have strange ways to focus on what nature intended them to do. Scorpion fly. What is weirder than a scorpion-fly hybrid? I can't think of much. This weird bug is known as the scorpion fly, and it has a strange combination of the characteristics of both a fly and a scorpion. It almost looks like a wasp with a curling scorpion stinger. But the weirdest thing is that even though the scorpion fly males do have tails, they don't actually sting with them. It looks exactly like a scorpion tail, but it's purely a visual effect. The bulging end of the tail is actually the reproductive organ of the male. It's not a stinger. It can't hurt you, it's only used to fertilize the eggs of the female scorpion fly after the male has courted her using gifts of food and pheromones. Female scorpion flies do not have the scorpion-like tail. However, both males and females of these species kind of look like wasps. They have yellow and black wings and pointy noses. Females lay their eggs inside of rotting wood, and the larvae that come out weeks later look a lot like caterpillars and grow by eating whatever dead insects they find in the wood. In order to become an adult, the little caterpillar babies must go through metamorphosis. There's no doubt about it, these animals are confusing, but a swarm of them would terrify anyone. What do you think? Would you be scared if 100 or more scorpion flies started charging at you in an aerial swarm? Let me know how you'd react in the comment section below, but first, don't forget to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. There are more impressive fact videos coming out all the time, and you won't want to miss them. Assassin bug. The assassin bug is one of the weirdest insects in the world. It's an insane bug that you have probably never heard of. Some might even call this creature absurd. It's a fearless and ferocious bug that sucks its prey dry and then dresses in their corpses like a morbid mad scientist. The assassin bug impales its victims, drains them of their internal organs, then attaches the corpse of the slain onto its back. A young assassin bug will literally craft a backpack of dead ants and other insects to show how fearsome it is. And not just one or two bugs, it will build up a giant shield of dozens of dead creatures and carry them around. This gives the assassin bug the appearance of a weird boss from some creepy video game. Not only does a backpack of dead bugs work as a deterrent for those other creatures who might want to eat the assassin bug, it also works as armor. It's hard to eat something that has 17 victims piled on its back. The assassin bug's favorite thing to eat and wear are ants, termites, and bees. These things are absolutely fearless, and to make things even stranger, there are supposedly 7,000 species of assassin bugs all over the world, which means there's a good chance you could find one to make into a pet. Would that scare off potential intruders the way a guard dog would? I don't know, but I'd like to find out. Giant burrowing cockroach. Everyone hates cockroaches. There is nothing worse than opening the utensil drawer and finding a hive of smelly cockroaches scurrying off deeper into your cabinets. It's one of the most revolting experiences one can have in their lifetime, which makes it even more unpleasant to talk about the weirdest and heaviest cockroach in the world. It's known as the giant burrowing cockroach, and yes, it actually hisses at you. The giant burrowing cockroach will build intricate nests to protect itself and hide out from predators. Interestingly, it also gives birth to live babies, which is unusual for insects. And most importantly, it's seriously huge. It's only the second largest cockroach in the world by length, but it beats all others in terms of weight. Giant burrowing cockroaches typically burrow into deep soil. They can create labyrinths beneath the soil up to 20 feet, 6 meters long. And at the very end of these weird tunnels, cockroaches set up little apartments. They actually leave their young inside these burrows and take care of them for up to 6 months until they're ready to fend for themselves. They are one of the most conscientious insect parents on Earth. They take such good care of their young babies that it's hard to think about stomping on one of these bugs just because it grosses you out. Don't forget, cockroaches are a part of the world's ecosystem too. Brazilian tree hopper. The Brazilian tree hopper is another weird bug, and it's got this particularly strange appendage on its head, one that has scientists scratching their heads trying to figure out what it's for. You see, the Brazilian tree hopper has 6 legs and a crown in the shape of 4 spheres. That's right, this strange insect lives in the Amazon rainforest and has one of the coolest hats of any insect, a ball hat. It has 2 sets of balls on its head that look like a TV antenna of some sort. The balls on top of the tree hopper's head are believed to have evolved as a kind of illusion, meant to distract predators who are trying to bite the bug in the face. Rather than biting its actual face, they will bite its distraction balls above its head so that it can get away. According to a report from Science Focus, most scientists believe the ball structures on the insect's head actually mimic a parasitic fungus known for infiltrating the bodies of ants and eventually killing them. This leaves the Brazilian tree hopper pretty safe, as no predator wants to eat such a dangerous fungus. So it's a disguise, and a pretty impressive one at that. Atlas moth. I'm not sure if Atlas moths are cool or weird, or a little bit of both. They almost look like they have fuzzy bat bodies because of their long antennae that look kinda like bats' ears. But other than that, they definitely look like moths. And yes, the Atlas moth is the biggest moth in the world in terms of its wing surface area. The Atlas moth can grow to be about 12 inches, 30 centimeters, meaning it can stretch its wings from one side of your face to the other. Atlas moths have no mouth, so even though these creatures are huge, they actually can't bite you or bite anything. Once they emerge from their cocoons, they don't eat a single thing. They rely on energy storage from their earlier stages in life to survive, and they don't have to survive for long. They typically die within about a week, and yes, that is pretty depressing. Just like the Titan beetle, it seems the Atlas moth focuses on exactly one thing once it becomes an adult. Eating more isn't important, it's all about reproduction and making way for the next generation of moth babies. Goliath bird eater. The Goliath bird eater is the largest and most disturbing spider in the world. Is it weird? Absolutely, yes. Every spider is weird in its own way. What kind of freakish creation has 8 legs, shoots webs out of its rear end, and has poisonous bites that can, in some species, actually kill a fully grown human? Only a spider. But the Goliath bird eater is not poisonous. It is a walking nightmare, since it's the size of a small puppy, but it's not poisonous. Guinness World Records does have the spider listed as the largest in the world. It has a leg span of about the size of a child's forearm. Basically, this spider could probably eat your chihuahua or your guinea pig. Don't underestimate this creature. Even though it's not poisonous, it's got a few tricks when it wants to fight. One of the most unusual and dangerous tactics of this spider is that it rubs its hind legs against its abdomen, causing a cloud of hair to burst off it full of microscopic barbs. It's basically a microscopic dust cloud full of tiny needles that can get into your eyes and become extremely painful. Think about 1,000 tiny needles piercing your eyeballs and staying there for days. That is the Goliath bird eater's weirdest special power, and it's one reason I would never mess with it. Would you? Jewel beetle. How about a bedazzled beetle? Is that weird enough for you? The jewel beetle is a pretty typical insect, but they look very weird. It looks like someone got their hands on the beetle and turned it into a bedazzled cell phone case. These beetles appear to be covered in very shiny jewels, and there are a lot of different subspecies of the jewel beetle. For example, you have the glittering jewel beetle, the metal jewel beetle, the emerald jewel beetle, the brush jewel beetle, and even the giant jewel beetle. The brush jewel beetle, from an aesthetic perspective, is my favorite. It's super unique in the fact that it's bright and covered in spiky hairs. It's like a work of art in a living creature. It almost looks like a caterpillar beetle with hairs that look inherently poisonous, though they are not. But what's really weird about jewel beetles is that it can take 35 years for immature jewel beetles to turn into adults. That's a seriously long time for any organism. If you like long-lived and beautiful insects, there is a lot to be said for the jewel beetle as a very unique pet. Would you want to have one? Let me know in the comments below which is your favorite. Wax-tailed hopper. The final weird insect for today is the wax-tailed hopper. This bizarre animal has a pattern of hair that resembles one of those old troll dolls. It's super unique and very different from other animals in the rainforest. It looks like a normal fly and a half-eaten cheese string put together. Its body is super weird, and its tail appears to be shredded, but in fact, its tail is made out of wax. The wax-tailed hopper actually squirts wax from its body, wax it creates within its body thanks to the plant juices it eats, and the wax accumulates until it has formed a sort of long-haired tail. The insect uses its wax tail as protection to keep predators away from it and as a cushion in case it falls off a branch. Sometimes the waxy tail will even break off, but the wax-tailed hopper will just grow another one. Also, females will use their wax to protect their eggs until they hatch. And finally, the whiteness of all that wax helps the bug to stay camouflaged in the rainforest. So if you had a whole army of these insects, you could try to make your own candles out of their waste. And they would, without a doubt, be some extremely strange and unique candles. Which bizarre bug is the weirdest? From aircraft to failed cruise ships, here are 10 amazing abandoned vehicles with cool stories. 1947 Buick Hearse. When photos of a strange, customized Buick Hearse surfaced online in 2014, the internet was immediately set abuzz. Complete with an ornate casket-holding cargo section, broad windows, and golden angel details, it was a far cry from the original design. Built in Michigan as a standard 1947 Buick Roadmaster estate wagon, the vehicle was later shipped overseas to Greece and converted into a hearse by some unknown owner. After replacing the rear passenger seat with the cargo hold to transport a coffin, additional ornamental trim, angels and tail fins from a 1956 Chevrolet were also added. Inside, electric candelabras and ornate crosses decorate the rear compartment for those dearly departed. 18 windows, including several in the roof, allowing onlookers to view the deceased. After laying to rot and rust in a field for years, a man named Dante Fontana from Italy spotted the car and promptly bought it, and has now set up a Facebook page to detail the restoration. Canada's Space Shuttle Replica. In a small theme park on Prince Edward Island, Canada, a full-scale replica of the Space Shuttle Columbia sits in the middle of an abandoned field. Once part of the theme park known as Science Fun, the shuttle replica was one of only 6 replicas in the world with access for the general public to walk through and investigate. The centerpiece of the theme park known as Great Island Science Adventure Park, the space shuttle was designed and built by the owners to attract kids of all ages who had an affinity for space exploration. For 20 years, theme park welcomed visitors to the location who were treated to a full-scale replica of the ill-fated Space Shuttle Columbia in the Canadian province. Built in the 1980s, the shuttle in Atlantic Canada was part of a larger complex that housed a science center, planetarium, dinosaur museum, and other activities. Stretching nearly 40 meters long and 5 stories high at the tail, the full-size replica allowed visitors to enter through the main hatch in a true-to-life representation of the crew's living quarters. Mock-ups of all the major equipment was included, as well as mannequins in flight suits and spacesuits similar to those worn by the astronauts. Visitors were then able to visit the flight deck, allowing them to sit in the commander's seat or go to the cargo bay, the rear portion of the shuttle that was turned into a science center with hands-on activities for kids. And now for number 8, but first be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell to join us here at Talltanic for more awesome content. Ekranoplan. During the Cold War, as the United States and the Soviet Union worked against one another to build bigger, better weaponry, a Russian-built flying boat known as the Orleanak became an entirely new class of vehicles known as Ekranoplans. Originally designed by Rostislav Alexiev, who had previously made a name for himself designing fast hydrofoil boats, the Orleanak became an effective ground vehicle later copied for both military and civilian use. Hydrofoils use metal foils to lift the hull of the boat out of the water, resulting in decreased drag and increased speed. Able to achieve double the normal wind speed, the Orleanak was in a class all its own. Trapping air between the wings and the water, the Orleanak glided above the surface, making it more fuel efficient and much faster than boats. But Alexiev needed to justify how useful his design was, so in order to get funding, he made the case that the Orleanak was designed to move troops and supplies quickly over water. Unfortunately, his secret design was not a well-kept one when, after years of prototyping and testing, a US spy plane captured images of the aircraft. But all was not necessarily lost. After analyzing the images, US intelligence deemed that it could not fly and dismissed the invention. But they were wrong. The Orleanak was able to reach a top speed of 249 miles per hour and carry 150 personnel per trip. Its ability to take off and land on dry land meant the Ekranoplan was capable of delivering troops on a beach for an amphibious assault. Even though the design was a success, the Orleanak and all other similar vehicles were retired in the early 1990s when the Soviet military focused its funding and research on nuclear submarines. Unfortunately, the need for specialized equipment to create such aircraft meant that the design, although unique and effective, was ultimately scrapped. Concrete ship Gutian. Known as the world's largest concrete ship, the Gutian, a 3,000-ton ship that made its first voyage in 1974, was built at a time when there was a steel shortage in China. Launched as a way to bring in a new age of sea voyages, the ship would only sail once before officials realized it would cost too much to power the concrete ship through the waters. The 345-foot-long, 48-foot-wide ship was promptly driven ashore and grounded, later becoming a popular spot for locals to squat. It also attracted tourists, becoming a minor attraction for 40 years after being beached on the banks of the Mingjiang River. Later used as a training base for the Fujian Ship Communications College, the Gutian, at first deemed too expensive to destroy, it was later prepared for demolition in 2013 after the land on which it sat was purchased for redevelopment. It took 3 months for workers to dismantle the 3,000-ton ship using heavy machinery to take apart this massive vessel, built to herald in a new age where China had mastery of the sea. The Sham Rockaway Motorhome. It's not every day that you spot a motorhome built from not 1 but 4 cars. Such is the case of the Sham Rockaway, a strange stacked custom motorhome built from 4 1962 Buick station wagons. Built in the 1960s by a Buick enthusiast named J. Dennis McGuire in Michigan, the strange-looking vehicle was crafted from one station wagon in the middle with another split in 2, the front and back ends welded onto the first. Pieces from 2 other Buicks make up the top section of the vehicle, stacked on top of the first. The motorhome also had a completely custom gearbox that allowed all 4 front wheels to turn together, an early precursor to modern steering methods. Weighing in at almost 10,000 pounds of curb weight, the Sham Rockaway stood 6 feet tall with a length of 28 feet from bumper to bumper. With such a large vehicle, it took 2 gas tanks to run, but inside it still had modern conveniences like a kitchen, a stowage area, and even a bathroom. But the Sham Rockaway was not the first vehicular invention of McGuire's. He also converted a 1942 school bus into a camper and transformed a 1958 flexible coach, a type of bus, in the 1960s. It just proves that even if necessity is the mother of invention, so too is the love of a good car. MAZ-543 Redoubt. As the Cold War gained momentum, the Soviet military needed a mobile, fortified site for defensive weapons. In an attempt to create a vehicle that was both easy to move and quick to relocate, the USSR developed a protected machine on a truck chassis that was fortified and mobile. Starting in the 1950s, various methods and mechanisms were developed and fine-tuned, but it would take almost 20 years for the Ministry of Defense to present a new concept of protected vehicle for command and control points. Codenamed Redoubt, the heavy truck with the capacity of 19 to 22 tons was adapted to operate in conditions of high humidity and dust and from -42 plus 50 Celsius at altitudes of up to 3,000 meters above sea level. With high cross-country capabilities and maneuverability in difficult conditions, the Redoubt was a massive machine that unfortunately suffered from various problems, including extracting it from frozen ground. After making some design modifications, the machine was brought into a prepared pit, allowing it to dig in and turn into a full-fledged bunker. Capacity for the machine was estimated at 10 people with 3 aircraft armchairs and various phones and displays for mobile communications. Many military leaders became interested in the Redoubt and supported the idea of mass production, but the Soviet defense minister believed it would be too costly for the Soviet budget, and unfortunately, without even wanting to see a demonstration of the Redoubt, the vehicle was scrapped. The Spruce Goose. During World War II, the United States looked for ways to ship supplies and trips overseas to Allied Britain. But with ocean travel a grim proposition with the threat of German U-boats lurking beneath the waves, the US Navy had to develop something more safe to deliver the payload they needed to make the trip worthwhile. When Howard Hughes, the Hollywood producer and aviation pioneer, decided to try to tackle the problem, he came up with the idea to utilize birch trees to create an airplane that would fly across continents and land in ports across Europe. Standing 5 stories tall and with a 300-foot-long wingspan, the H-4 Hercules, also known as the Spruce Goose, plane could transport 750 troops at a time and hold a Sherman tank inside. After spending 5 years on development, the plane, the H-4 Hercules, flew only one time for 1 mile. 16 months after the original idea, the project was abandoned after a pile of failed prototypes and little progress. With Congress spending $18 million for 3 aircraft that could be deployed in the midst of World War II, the airships were expected by the end of 1943. But when that time came and went, the project seemed to be dead in the water with no airplane delivered. After Hughes spent between $5 and $7 million of his own money to keep the project afloat, the vehicle was still in development in 1947. But to prove its worth and to justify the spending, Hughes still wanted to show off his efforts. Bringing the Hercules into the port of Long Beach, the plane was taxied down into the harbor, and with all 8 high-capacity engines running, the plane rose to about 70 feet in the air, where it stayed for about a minute at 135 miles per hour. Luckily, Hughes' display proved the Hercules could fly, satisfying Congress, who were worried about misappropriating funds. Hughes and his company later turned over the other contracted aircraft, but kept the original for himself, returning it to his hangar where it disappeared from the public eye. After spending approximately $1 million every year between 1947 and 1976 to maintain and upkeep the plane, Hughes later donated the plane to the Evergreen Aviation Museum in Oregon. Although it cost Americans $18 million, Hughes funded another $5 to $7 million to get the plane in the air. Unfortunately, the same way the H-4 Hercules disappeared, so too did Hughes, as he descended into a recluse not long after the Hercules was finished. Now dubbed the Spruce Goose, the plane would go down as one of aviation's most notorious projects that never quite lived up to the hype. Abandoned hovercraft. A district in Mumbai, India, might seem like the most unlikely of places to find an abandoned hovercraft. So how about 2? Sitting in a port, the abandoned hovercraft carcasses of the Triton 1 and the Triton 2 are the remnants of a British-built vessel that never really seemed to get off the ground. Beginning in 1996, hovercraft services began in India, ferrying more than 1,000 passengers every day between Chowpatty Beach and a suburb of Mumbai. But it seemed to be an ill-fated venture, as jetties and access roads that were to be built to the beach landing never materialized. When local fishermen began to anchor the boats in the path of the hovercrafts, the vehicles were obstructed from entering or leaving the landing zone. Even though the hovercrafts were successful at sea, bureaucracy, insufficient infrastructure, and local opposition combined to sink the service before it got off the dry land. Officially terminated in 1998, the hovercrafts are now abandoned on dry land. Although they were only built in 1992, the elements have taken their toll on the vehicles, and they now sit in an abandoned graveyard, battered by the elements and wasting away. Some also say that with a new hovercraft venture coming to light, the original vehicles were broken up for scrap, still giving them an opportunity to reach their potential, but not in the way the original designers of the Triton 1 and 2 initially planned. Abandoned Ukraine excavators. Up until 9 years ago, the Morzov open-cast mine was one of the most active mines in Ukraine. Now, hundreds of coal trucks, once loaded every hour by huge excavators, stand abandoned and rusting. Operating until 2009, the company barely survived the 90s. When a power outage due to unpaid debts took over the mine, the Soviet and German equipment was left abandoned and the staff reduced, resulting in the quarry quickly filling the once busy mine with groundwater. With an estimated number of deposits of coal that would allow for 20 more years of active production, the site, which is now littered with large bucket excavators, is slowly being taken over by nature, with grass and trees now growing in the mining areas. With many of the machines built for the Second World War, the Morzov mine is a stark reminder of the industrialized Soviet Union. After it was dissolved, Ukraine became independent and didn't need so many industrial sites as entire cities were abandoned. The site began operation in the late 1980s, producing more than 1 million tons of coal per year. But being closed for so many years, nature has found a way to endure, with water and vegetation once again taking over the land. SS Aquarama. Built in 1945 as a troop transport ship for the Navy during World War II, the SS Aquarama, originally named the SS Marine Star, made only one trip across the Atlantic before combat ended. The ship was purchased in 1952 by a Detroit industrialist who spent the $8 million converting it into a cruise ferry ship, taking passengers between Detroit and Cleveland with the occasional stop in Buffalo. There were 9 decks with 4 restaurants, 4 bars, movie theaters, and even recreation areas. The ship could also hold 160 cars and 2,600 passengers. The SS Aquarama spanned 520 feet long and weighed 12,000 tons. The largest passenger ship to sail on the Great Lakes, the size and luxury of the ship came at a price, with operating costs being too much to keep up with. After various mishaps and changing hands a few times with ill-fated plans to revitalize and refurbish the ship that never materialized, the ship later ended up sitting for more than a decade in Buffalo, with plans to turn it into a casino. Ultimately, the ship ended up in Turkey, where it was scrapped in 2007, putting the rest of the dreams of the SS Aquarama from reaching its full potential as a luxury ship for elegant travel. Thanks for watching. Which abandoned vehicle did you think was the most interesting? Let us know, and be sure to hit that subscribe button before you go.